Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Emotional Design, Why We Love or Hate Everyday Things, by Don Norman. Narrated by George Newbern. Publisher's note. In this audio edition, you will hear references to figures present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Prologue. 3 teapots. If you want a golden rule that will fit everybody, this is it. Have nothing in your houses that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful. William Morris, The Beauty of Life, 1880. I have a collection of teapots, figures 0.1 through 0.3 A, B, and C in the print and ebook versions of the book. One of them is completely unusable. The handle is on the same side as the spout. It was invented by the French artist Jacques Carelman, who called it a coffee pot for masochists. Mine is a copy of the original. A picture of it appears on the cover of my book, The Design of Everyday Things. The second item in my collection is the teapot called Nana, whose unique squat and chubby nature is surprisingly appealing. The third is a complicated but practical tilting pot made by the German firm Ronenfeld. The Carelman pot is, by intent, impossible to use. The Nana teapot, designed by the well-known architect and product designer Michael Graves, looks clumsy but actually works rather well. The tilting pot, which I discovered while enjoying high tea at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, was designed with the different stages of tea brewing in mind. To use it, I place the tea leaves on a shelf out of sight in the pot's interior and lay the pot on its back while the leaves steep. As the brew approaches the desired strength, I prop the pot up at an angle, partially uncovering the tea leaves. When the tea is ready, I set the pot upright so that the leaves are no longer in contact with the tea. Which one of these teapots do I usually use? None of the above. I drink tea every morning. At an early hour, efficiency comes first. So, upon awakening, I pad into my kitchen and push the button on a Japanese hot pot to boil water while I spoon cut tea leaves into a little metal brewing bowl. I drop the ball into my cup, fill it with boiling water, wait a few minutes for it to steep, and my tea is ready to drink. Fast, efficient, easy to clean. Why am I so attached to my teapots? Why do I keep them out on display in the alcove formed by the kitchen window? Even when they are not in use, they are there, visible. I value my teapots not only for their function for brewing tea, but because they are sculptural artwork. I love standing in front of the window, comparing the contrasting shapes, watching the play of light on the varied surfaces. When I'm entertaining guests or have time to spare, I brew my tea in the Nana teapot for its charm or in the tilting pot for its cleverness. Design is important to me, but which design I choose depends on the occasion, the context, and above all, my mood. These objects are more than utilitarian. As art, they lighten up my day. Perhaps more important, each conveys a personal meaning. Each has its own story. One reflects my past, my crusade against unusable objects. One reflects my future, my campaign for beauty. And the third represents a fascinating mixture of the functional and the charming. The story of the teapots illustrates several components of product design: usability, or lack thereof, aesthetics, and practicality. In creating a product, a designer has many factors to consider: the choice of material, the manufacturing method, the way the product is marketed, cost and practicality, and how easy the product is to use, to understand. But what many people don't realize is that there's also a strong emotional component to how products are designed and put to use. In this book, I argue that the emotional side of design may be more critical to a product's success than its practical elements. The teapots also illustrate 3 different aspects of design: visceral, behavioral, and reflective. Visceral design concerns itself with appearances. Here's where the Nana teapot excels. I so enjoy its appearance, especially when filled with the amber hues of tea, lit from beneath by the flame of its warming candle. Behavioral design has to do with the pleasure and effectiveness of use. Here, both the tilting teapot and my little metal ball are winners. Finally, reflective design considers the rationalization and intellectualization of a product. Can I tell a story about it? Does it appeal to my self-image, to my pride? I love to show people how the tilting teapot works, explaining how the position of the pot signals the state of the tea. And of course, the teapot for masochists is entirely reflective. It isn't particularly beautiful, and it's certainly not useful, but what a wonderful story it tells. Beyond the design of an object, there is a personal component as well, one that no designer or manufacturer can provide. The objects in our lives are more than mere material possessions. We take pride in them, not necessarily because we are showing off our wealth or status, but because of the meanings they bring to our lives. A person's most beloved objects may well be inexpensive trinkets, frayed furniture, or photographs and books, often tattered, dirty, or faded. A favorite object is a symbol, setting up a positive frame of mind, a reminder of pleasant memories, or sometimes an expression of oneself. And this object always has a story, a remembrance, and something that ties us personally to this particular object, this particular thing. Visceral, behavioral, and reflective. These three very different dimensions are interwoven through any design. It is not possible to have design without all three. But more important, note how these three components interweave both emotions and cognition. This is so despite the common tendency to pit cognition against emotion. Whereas emotion is said to be hot, animalistic, and irrational, cognition is cool, human, and logical. This contrast comes from a long intellectual tradition that prides itself on rational, logical reasoning. Emotions are out of place in a polite, sophisticated society. They are remnants of our animal origins, but we humans must learn to rise above them. At least that is the perceived wisdom. Nonsense. Emotions are inseparable from and a necessary part of cognition. Everything we do, everything we think is tinged with emotion, much of it subconscious. In turn, our emotions change the way we think and serve as constant guides to appropriate behavior, steering us away from the bad, guiding us toward the good. Some objects evoke strong positive emotions, such as love, attachment, and happiness. In reviewing BMW's Mini Cooper car, figure .5, the New York Times observed, "Whatever one may think of the Mini Cooper's dynamic attributes, which range from very good to marginal, it is fair to say that almost no new vehicle in recent memory has provoked more smiles. The car is so much fun to look at and drive that the reviewer suggests you overlook its faults." Several years ago, I was taking part in a radio show along with designer Michael Graves. I had just criticized one of Graves's creations, the rooster teapot, as being pretty to look at, but difficult to use. To pour the water was to risk a scalding, when a listener called in who owned the rooster. "I love my teapot," he said. "When I wake up in the morning and stumble across the kitchen to make my cup of tea, it always makes me smile." His message seemed to be, so what if it's a little difficult to use? Just be careful. It's so pretty it makes me smile. The first thing in the morning, that's most important. One side effect of today's technologically advanced world is that it is not uncommon to hate the things we interact with. Consider the rage and frustration many people feel when they use computers. In an article on computer rage, a London newspaper put it this way. It starts out with slight annoyance, then the hairs on your neck start to prickle and your hands begin to sweat. Soon you are banging your computer or yelling at the screen, and you might well end up belting the person sitting next to you. In the 1980s, in writing The Design of Everyday Things, I didn't take emotions into account. I addressed utility and usability, function and form, all in a logical, dispassionate way, even though I am infuriated by poorly designed objects. But now I've changed. Why? In part because of new scientific advances in our understanding of the brain and how emotion and cognition are thoroughly intertwined. We scientists now understand how important emotion is to everyday life, how valuable. Sure, utility and usability are important, but without fun and pleasure, joy and excitement, and yes, anxiety and anger, fear and rage, our lives would be incomplete. Along with emotions, there is one other point as well: aesthetics, attractiveness, and beauty. When I wrote The Design of Everyday Things, my intention was not to denigrate aesthetics or emotion. I simply wanted to elevate usability to its proper place in the design world, alongside beauty and function. I thought that the topic of aesthetics was well covered elsewhere, so I neglected it. The result has been the well-deserved criticism from designers. If we were to follow Norman's prescription, our designs would all be usable, but they would also be ugly. Usable but ugly, that's a pretty harsh judgment. Alas, the critique is valid. Usable designs are not necessarily enjoyable to use. And as my 3 teapot story indicates, an attractive design is not necessarily the most efficient. But must these attributes be in conflict? Can beauty and brains, pleasure and usability go hand in hand? All these questions propelled me into action. I was intrigued by the difference between my scientific self and my personal life. In science, I ignored aesthetics and emotion and concentrated on cognition. Indeed, I was one of the early workers in the fields that today are known as cognitive psychology and cognitive science. The field of usability design takes root in cognitive science, a combination of cognitive psychology, computer science, and engineering, analytical fields whose members pride themselves on scientific rigor and logical thought. In my personal life, however, I visited art galleries, listened to and played music, and was proud of the architect-designed home in which I lived. As long as these 2 sides of my life were separate, there wasn't any conflict. But early in my career, I experienced a surprising challenge from an unlikely source: the use of color monitors for computers. In the early years of the personal computer, color displays were unheard of. Most of the display screens were black and white. Sure, the very first Apple computer, the Apple II, could display color, but for games, any serious work done on the Apple II was done in black and white, usually white text on a black background. In the early 1980s, when color screens were first introduced to the world of personal computers, I had trouble understanding their appeal. In those days, color was primarily used to highlight text or to add superfluous decoration to the screen. From a cognitive point of view, color added no value that shading could not provide. But businesses insisted on buying color monitors at added cost, despite their having no scientific justification. Obviously, color was fulfilling some need, but one we could not measure. I borrowed a color monitor to see what all the fuss was about. I was soon convinced that my original assessment had been correct. Color added no discernible value for everyday work. Yet I refused to give up the color display. My reasoning told me that color was unimportant, but my emotional reaction told me otherwise. Notice the same phenomenon in movies, television, and newspapers. At first, all movies were in black and white. So too was television. Movie makers and television manufacturers resisted the introduction of color because it added huge costs with little discernible gain. After all, a story is a story. What difference does color make? But would you go back to black and white TV or movies? Today, the only time something is filmed in black and white is for artistic aesthetic reasons. The lack of full color makes a strong emotional statement. The same lesson has not fully transferred to newspapers and books. Everyone agrees that color is usually preferred, but whether the benefits are sufficient to overcome the additional costs it entails is hotly debated. Although color has crept into the pages of newspapers, most of the photographs and advertisements are still in black and white. So too with books. The photographs in this book are all in black and white, even though the originals are in color. In most books, the only place color appears is on the cover, presumably to lure you into purchasing the book. But once you've purchased it, the color is thought to have no further use. The problem is that we still let logic make decisions for us, even though our emotions are telling us otherwise. Business has come to be ruled by logical, rational decision makers, by business models and accountants, with no room for emotion. Pity. We cognitive scientists now understand that emotion is a necessary part of life, affecting how you feel, how you behave, and how you think. Indeed, emotion makes you smart. That's the lesson of my current research. Without emotions, your decision-making ability would be impaired. Emotion is always passing judgments, presenting you with immediate information about the world. Here is potential danger. There is potential comfort. This is nice, that bad. One of the ways by which emotions work is through neurochemicals that bathe particular brain centers and modify perception, decision-making, and behavior. These neurochemicals change the parameters of thought. The surprise is that we now have evidence that aesthetically pleasing objects enable you to work better. As I shall demonstrate, products and systems that make you feel good are easier to deal with and produce more harmonious results. When you wash and polish your car, doesn't it seem to drive better? When you bathe and dress up and clean fancy clothes, don't you feel better? And when you use a wonderful, well-balanced, aesthetically pleasing garden or woodworking tool, tennis racket, or pair of skis, don't you perform better? Before I go on, let me interject a technical comment. I'm talking here about affect, not just emotion. A major theme of this book is that much of human behavior is subconscious, beneath conscious awareness. Consciousness comes late, both in evolution and also in the way the brain processes information. Many judgments have already been determined before they reach consciousness. Both affect and cognition are information processing systems, but they have different functions. The affective system makes judgments and quickly helps you determine which things in the environment are dangerous or safe, good or bad. The cognitive system interprets and makes sense of the world. Affect is the general term for the judgmental system, whether conscious or subconscious. Emotion is the conscious experience of affect, complete with attribution of its cause and identification of its object. The queasy, uneasy feeling you might experience without knowing why is affect. Anger at Harry, the used car salesman who overcharged you for an unsatisfactory vehicle, is emotion. You are angry at something, Harry, for a reason. Note that cognition and affect influence one another. Some emotions and affective states are driven by cognition, while affect often impacts cognition. Let's use a simple example. Imagine a long and narrow plank 10 meters long and 1 meter wide. Place it on the ground. Can you walk on it? Of course. You can jump up and down, dance, and even walk along with your eyes shut. Now, prop the plank up so that it is 3 meters off the ground. Can you walk on it? Yes, although you proceed more carefully. What if the plank were 100 meters in the air? Most of us wouldn't dare go near it, even though the act of walking along it and maintaining balance should be no more difficult than when the plank is on the ground. How can a simple task suddenly become so difficult? The reflective part of your mind can rationalize that the plank is just as easy to walk on at a height as on the ground. But the automatic lower visceral level controls your behavior. For most people, the visceral level wins. Fear dominates. You may try to justify your fear by stating that the plank might break or that because it is windy you might be blown off. But all this conscious rationalization comes after the fact, after the affective system has released its chemicals. The affective system works independently of conscious thought. Finally, affect and emotion are crucial for everyday decision-making. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio studied people who were perfectly normal in every way, except for brain injuries that impaired their emotional systems. As a result, despite their appearance of normality, they were unable to make decisions or function effectively in the world. While they could describe exactly how they should have been functioning, they couldn't determine where to live, what to eat, and what products to buy and use. This finding contradicts the common belief that decision-making is the heart of rational, logical thought. But modern research shows that the affective system provides critical assistance to your decision-making, by helping you make rapid selections between good and bad, reducing the number of things to be considered. People without emotions, as in Damasio's study, are often unable to choose between alternatives, especially if each choice appears equally valid. Do you want to come in for your appointment on Monday or Tuesday? Do you want rice or baked potato with your food? Simple choices? Yes. Perhaps too simple. There is no rational way to decide. This is where affect is useful. Most of us just decide on something, but if asked why, often don't know. I just felt like it, one might reply. A decision has to feel good, or else it is rejected, and such feeling is an expression of emotion. The emotional system is also tightly coupled with behavior, preparing the body to respond appropriately to a given situation. This is why you feel tense and edgy when anxious. The queasy or knotted feelings in your gut are not imaginary. They are real manifestations of the way that emotions control your muscle systems, and yes, even your digestive system. Thus, pleasant tastes and smells cause you to salivate, to inhale and ingest. Unpleasant things cause the muscles to tense as preparation for a response. A bad taste causes the mouth to pucker, food to be spit out, the stomach muscles to contract. All of these reactions are part of the experience of emotion. We literally feel good or bad, relaxed or tense. Emotions are judgmental and prepare the body accordingly. Your conscious cognitive self observes those changes. Next time you feel good or bad about something but don't know why, listen to your body, to the wisdom of its affective system. Just as emotions are critical to human behavior, they are equally critical for intelligent machines, especially autonomous machines of the future that will help people in their daily activities. Robots, to be successful, will have to have emotions, a topic I discuss in more detail in Chapter 6. Not necessarily the same as human emotions, these will be emotions nonetheless, ones tailored to the needs and requirements of a robot. Furthermore, the machines and products of the future may be able to sense human emotions and respond accordingly. Soothe you when you are upset, humor you, console you, play with you. As I said, cognition interprets and understands the world around you, while emotions allow you to make quick decisions about it. Usually, you react emotionally to a situation before you assess it cognitively, since survival is more important than understanding. But sometimes cognition comes first. One of the powers of the human mind is its ability to dream, to imagine, and to plan for the future. In this creative soaring of the mind, thought and cognition unleash emotion and are in turn changed themselves. To explain how this comes about, let me now turn to the science of affect and emotion. Part 1. The Meaning of Things. Chapter 1. Attractive Things Work Better. Noam Chortynski, an Israeli scientist, was puzzled. Attractive things certainly should be preferred over ugly ones, but why would they work better? Yet in the early 1990s, two Japanese researchers, Masaki Kurosu and Kaori Kashimura, claimed just that. They studied different layouts of controls for ATMs, automated teller machines that allow us to perform simple banking tasks any time of the day or night. All versions of the ATMs were identical in function, the number of buttons and how they operated. But some had the buttons and screens arranged attractively, the others unattractively. Surprise, the Japanese found that the attractive ones were perceived to be easier to use. Chortynski was suspicious. Maybe the experiment had flaws. Or perhaps the result could be true of Japanese, but certainly not of Israelis. Clearly, said Chortynski, aesthetic preferences are culturally dependent. Moreover, he continued, Japanese culture is known for its aesthetic tradition. But Israelis? Nah, Israelis are action-oriented. They don't care about beauty. So Chortynski redid the experiment. He got the ATM layouts from Kurosu and Kashimura, translated them from Japanese into Hebrew, and designed a new experiment with rigorous methodological controls. Not only did he replicate the Japanese findings, but contrary to his belief that usability and aesthetics were not expected to correlate, the results were stronger in Israel than in Japan. Traktinsky was so surprised that he put that phrase, "were not expected," in italics, an unusual thing to do in a scientific paper, but appropriate, he felt, given the unexpected conclusion. In the early 1900s, Herbert Reed, who wrote numerous books on art and aesthetics, stated, "It requires a somewhat mystical theory of aesthetics to find any necessary connection between beauty and function," and that belief is still common today. How could aesthetics affect how easy something is to use? I just started a research project examining the interaction of affect, behavior, and cognition, but Traktinsky's results bothered me. I couldn't explain them. Still, they were intriguing, and they supported my own personal experiences, some of which I described in the prologue. As I pondered the experimental results, I realized they fit with the new framework that my research collaborators and I were constructing, as well as with new findings in the study of affect and emotion. Emotions, we now know, change the way the human mind solves problems. The emotional system changes how the cognitive system operates. So if aesthetics would change our emotional state, that would explain the mystery. Let me explain. Until recently, emotion was an ill-explored part of human psychology. Some people thought it was an evolutionary leftover from our animal origins. Most thought of emotions as a problem to be overcome by rational, logical thinking. And most of the research focused upon negative emotions such as stress, fear, anxiety, and anger. Modern work has completely reversed this view. Science now knows that evolutionarily more advanced animals are more emotional than primitive ones, the human being the most emotional of all. Moreover, emotions play a critical role in daily lives, helping assess situations as good or bad, safe or dangerous. As I discussed in the prologue, emotions aid in decision-making. Positive emotions are as important as negative ones. Positive emotions are critical to learning, curiosity, and creative thought. And today, research is turning toward this dimension. One finding particularly intrigued me. The psychologist Alice Eisen and her colleagues have shown that being happy broadens the thought processes and facilitates creative thinking. Eisen discovered that when people were asked to solve difficult problems, ones that required unusual, out-of-the-box thinking, they did much better when they had just been given a small gift. Not much of a gift, but enough to make them feel good. When you feel good, Eisen discovered, you are better at brainstorming, at examining multiple alternatives. And it doesn't take much to make people feel good. All Eisen had to do was ask people to watch a few minutes of a comedy film or receive a small bag of candy. We have long known that when people are anxious, they tend to narrow their thought processes, concentrating upon aspects directly relevant to a problem. This is a useful strategy in escaping from danger, but not in thinking of imaginative new approaches to a problem. Eisen's results show that when people are relaxed and happy, their thought processes expand, becoming more creative, more imaginative. These and related findings suggest the role of aesthetics in product design. Attractive things make people feel good, which in turn makes them think more creatively. How does that make something easier to use? Simple, by making it easier for people to find solutions to the problems they encounter. With most products, if the first thing you try fails to produce the desired result, the most natural response is to try again, only with more effort. In today's world of computer-controlled products, doing the same operation over again is very unlikely to yield better results. The correct response is to look for alternative solutions. The tendency to repeat the same operation over again is especially likely for those who are anxious or tense. This state of negative affect leads people to focus upon the problematic details, and if this strategy fails to provide a solution, they get even more tense, more anxious, and increase their concentration upon those troublesome details. Contrast this behavior with those who are in a positive emotional state, but encountering the same problem. These people are apt to look around for alternative approaches, which is very likely to lead to a satisfying end. Afterward, the tense and anxious people will complain about the difficulties, whereas the relaxed, happy ones will probably not even remember them. In other words, happy people are more effective in finding alternative solutions, and as a result are tolerant of minor difficulties. Herbert Reed thought we would need a mystical theory to connect beauty and function. Well, it took 100 years, but today we have that theory, one based in biology, neuroscience, and psychology.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?